First, to give all of you a bit of background in case you're not familiar with what the school to prison pipeline is and how it works. So obviously we are based here in Texas, but do work particularly across the South, where there are a lot of common themes as it relates to punishing students in schools, having police in schools. But to give you all a sense of what we are talking about here, discipline in Texas, it looks like a number of things. So for exclusionary discipline, you see kids who are pushed out of their classrooms through in-school and out-of-school suspensions, placements in alternative schools, expulsions, and here in Texas and 18 other states, particularly in the South, we also see corporal punishment. So students who are spanked, paddled, slapped, or hit for discipline purposes. We also see policing in schools, and what that looks like is arrests of students, referrals to juvenile probation. Police in Texas schools are allowed to use force, so that includes tasers, pepper spray, and generally what you see in terms of the policing model is some school districts, like the larger ones, including Austin and San Antonio, will have their own internal school district police forces, and some will contract with local law enforcement agencies, and sometimes there's a combination of both of those models. We're also seeing now a lot of interesting new developments, particularly now that we're in a period of remote learning with the coronavirus, and following a lot of the very high-profile school shootings that happened. We saw an uptick in online monitoring of students, new technologies that were used as surveillance techniques in schools. And those are also ways that students are pushed out of school and disciplined. We're also now seeing school districts who are talking about things like charging students with assault if they sneeze on each other when they return to in-person learning. And we know that all of these things, including even one suspension, increase the likelihood of lost classroom and socialization time. That one is obvious, but also the likelihood of grade retention, school dropout, multiple forms of trauma, and contact with the juvenile and adult criminal legal systems. And so that's really the pipeline part of the school to prison pipeline. One highly problematic part of this entire system, besides what it does to every student who's pushed out, is that certain kids are overrepresented in these discipline and policing systems. So we know that kids with disabilities, LGBTQ kids are overrepresented. And we really see the worst disparities in punishments and policing of Black children. So if you look at the data from the 2018-19 school year here in Texas, Black children only made up about 13% of the student population, but they were 33% of all out of school suspensions. And we should all be really upset and outraged by that. We see the same disparities in policing. I just was reading this week, a report came out in Austin about the Austin ISD police department use of force data. And over the past 5 years, Black students were only 7% of students in the district, but they were 30% of the use of force cases with police. And that includes holds, pepper spray, and tasers. And so what we know is that we have a system that schools are propping up that is racially discriminatory. I think that unfortunately the thing that Celina and I have to say all the time, and a lot of other advocates, parents, and students have to say, which we hope is obvious but is not to everybody, is that Black kids are not more likely to misbehave. Again, Black kids are not more likely to misbehave, they're just more likely to be punished. And for folks that disagree with that idea, they're not only rejecting the basic data around this issue, but we really think they're falling into this trap that was set a long time ago and used to justify all sorts of horrible racist systems and the mistreatment of Black people and other people of color. So we know there's a ton of research about the biases that teachers and school administrators have, that many of us have, that make it more likely that Black students will be punished and receive harsher punishments than their white peers, even for the exact same behaviors. We know that Black boys in particular, even preschool aged Black boys, are more likely than anyone else to be punished. And we know that Black girls, there's a lot of research that's coming out now, fortunately, about the types of punishments that Black girls are experiencing, and they're more likely than almost any other group of boys to be punished. There's a lot of great research from Jennifer Eberhardt out of Stanford about discipline and implicit bias. And of course, Harvard researchers were some of the early pioneers of the basic tests of implicit bias.
I went to a Title I predominantly Mexican-American high school in San Antonio. Half of my class didn't graduate. We were labeled by the press as a dropout factory. But even in that context, I was just not prepared for the type of waste of potential that we saw, just how easily that some children seem to be just so disposable to schools. So many students report that they actually feel less safe when there are police in their schools. Overfunded, overused, discriminatory practices, policing systems, they're not new, although I think some people are starting to reawaken or awaken to them, and I think that's exciting. But they're not new, and they're not limited to city streets. And I think the school to prison pipeline is intimately connected with the racist criminal legal system, with the incredible momentum of the Black Lives Matter movement. I think right now is just an opportune time, and it's a crucial time for us to reimagine what school safety is and what welcoming school environments for all students can really look like.
They are smart. Kids are so smart. They see that certain groups of their classmates have contact with the police while other groups do not. They see that we push some students away and exclude them, sometimes for no apparent reason, while we give other students the benefit of the doubt. And so some schools are actually modeling for all students these really harmful stereotypes, and they're promoting the idea that certain students deserve to be criminalized and others don't. And we have a lot of work to do to combat that miseducation that's ingrained in so many children who then grow up to be adults. So, when many of us talk about ways that we can support the Black Lives Matter movement or end police brutality and other forms of brutality against Black people, we have to simultaneously talk about the need for changing, very fundamentally, our education systems, for ending harmful and inappropriate school discipline, and for getting police out of schools. Those two conversations have to happen at the same time because they are so connected. And that's how we create safe and welcoming schools for all students.
What is that we can do to make sure that the schools are safe? I mean, everybody cares about that. And I think first and foremost, we have to invest in students and their well-being. There are 14 million students in this country that are in schools without a counselor, that they have police in schools, but there's no counselor in those schools. There's no school psychologist. There's no social worker. There's no school nurse, but there are police in those schools, and that's just unacceptable. And so we have to invest in students. I think another way to dismantle the school to prison pipeline is to really build the school to college pipeline for all youth, to also invest in restorative practices, which focus on relationships, which focus on repairing harm, as opposed to just punishment for misbehavior. And so I think to do these things, right, to build on the college the school to college pipeline, that takes resources. We need to make sure that teachers are diverse and well-trained. We need anti-racist and culturally sustaining pedagogy and curriculum.
One thing that's so exciting about all of this is that we can all play a part at so many levels. So one of my favorite things to talk about is work that we have done in the past and some of the successes that we've seen from working with students and families and communities to change things within their campus, within their district, and eventually at other levels. So as an example, a few years ago, we worked to end out-of-school suspensions for very young children from pre-K to second grade. So Yes, that happened in Texas. Yes, it is silly and doesn't make sense, and it still happens in a lot of other states. But what we did was we started with families and advocates, a whole coalition of people, and worked with school district administrators, first in Houston ISD, where they passed a district level policy to protect young students from suspensions. Then, we formed coalitions in Austin and Dallas and did the same thing. And then a few months later, we took the idea to the Texas Legislature. And in 2017, all of us passed one of the only statewide laws in the country that bans most out-of-school suspensions for our youngest students. And in the upcoming legislative session in 2021, we have similar goals, again, starting from these movements at the local level. We want to get police out of school buildings. We want to end abusive techniques like tasers and pepper spray. And we want to end harmful and discriminatory dress code and hair policies that we know target Black youth and girls. And again, the thing that I love about all this work is that there's a role for everyone. All of you have a part to play in this, which we're really excited about.